Big T Steak Corner. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So today we're going to be taking a look at the ATi Radeon HD4850 versus the HD4870. Now the 4850 retailed for about $200 US new, whereas the 4870 was $300 US new. That was the suggested retail price, so kind of fluctuates a little bit. But these two graphics cards are very similar to each other, but we're trying to figure out, was it really worth the extra $100? And to answer that question, what I want to do is I want to take these two video cards and play some games from around the 2008 era, because that's when these cards were brand new, and maybe push it with something a little bit newer, with the maximum settings at 1080p. Now one thing to note that's really cool is that the HD4870 was AMD's very first GDDR5 consumer GPU. I don't even think Nvidia had released anything at the time. Their competition product, the GTX 200 series, was using GDDR3, but they had really high memory bandwidth. So we're talking like 448-bit, 512-bit, so it allowed them to really push the speeds of the GDDR3 memory. But AMD with GDDR5 was able to get similar memory performance to a GTX 260 much more efficiently by using GDDR5. So our test system today is the i7 3770K with 8GB of DDR3 1333 MHz. So to start things off, we'll be using the HD4850. This is the HIS Ice Q4 Turbo version, so it's a little bit, tiny little bit faster than the stock 4850, but as we saw in my previous video, that really doesn't make a difference. Nonetheless, every single game will be ran at 1080p with the maximum settings, so let's get straight into it with Half-Life 2. As expected, Half-Life 2 ran absolutely fine. There were zero issues, no frame drops, no frame dips, nothing. So very successful, and I would have been a little bit concerned if this game did not run well on this video card, so yeah. Next up was Unreal Tournament 3 Black Edition, and I believe this game came out in about 2009. Either way, I was pretty surprised to find out that it ran really well, and the game looks really good too, so this was definitely a game that this card was obviously meant to run back in the day. Next up is Borderlands Game of the Year. This is the non-enhanced version, and we see that the card starts to struggle now. 45 FPS is about our average here. We would get dips into the 30s, and it was playable, don't get me wrong, just not a very nice experience. It was very jittery. Lastly, I really wanted to push this graphics card, so I decided to try 2017's Voodoo Vince, which is a remastered original Xbox title. Not actually too different in terms of the graphics from the original Xbox versions, obviously more optimized to be HD, but still the same sort of graphics, and here we were seeing about, once again, 45-ish FPS, so it'll be interesting to see if the 4870 can one-up this. Alright, so now we're going to put the 4870 in. It should be noted that they are both the 512 meg versions. As far as I'm concerned, you can get up to 2 gigs on these graphics cards. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that there were variants that had 2 gigs, but what I'm most familiar with are the versions that have 512 megs of RAM. I do know that the 1 gigs exist, they're just really hard to find. But if you wanted to buy something that was a bit more future-proof, you definitely would have invested in the 1 gig model for sure. Once again, Half-Life 2 runs perfectly fine on this card. I'd be concerned if it didn't. Really nothing to say here. It's a good game and it runs really well on this card. Unreal Tournament 3 Black Edition sees no improvement over the 4850. Then again, it could be because I have VSync on, but at the end of the day, both cards run the game just fine, so that's 2 games so far that for $100 extra, it really doesn't justify the need to get a 4870. So here's where I was really hoping the 4870 would shine, and it didn't really impress me much. I mean, don't get me wrong, we saw an improvement of about 5 to 10 frames per second, which can fill in the gap between playable and unplayable, but in this case we still got the same old drops and the same old jitteriness. It's just the frame rate average was a little bit better, so not really a big success in my opinion. The Voodoo Vince is a bit of an interesting one because this level that I'm showing again, it was about the same frame rate as last time, maybe a tiny little bit better, but certain other areas like the main menu for example had twice the frame rate that it did with the 4850, so I guess we could say it's a little bit of a success. So the 4850 is basically just a dumbed down 4870. It has GDDR3 memory and about 100 MHz less on the core clock. So was it really worth the extra $100 to get yourself a fancy 4870 with GDDR5 RAM? No, it really wasn't. As you can see here, the performance is about the same, at least for titles from the time. It was about the same performance between both cards. So honestly, these weren't even really a good option back in the day if you wanted the most performance. They were a good budget option because their price range, they were actually really decent cards, but the GTX 260 and 280 were just sweeping these cards on the floor. Way better cards. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more.